I'm Mason Stevenson, and welcome to the HR Exchange Podcast. On this week's episode, Eric Torigian, Vice President of U.S. Human Resources and Assistant General Manager of Global HR for Akebono Brake Corporation, joins us. An impressive resume from Torigian, sporting some world-famous companies, including Ford, PepsiCo, and Comcast. We talk about how he left his position as an analyst and computer programmer, building medical billing software, and found his way to the human resources space. We also discuss the state of HR, transparency, and leadership. First, a word about the HR Exchange Network, and then Eric Torigian. Join the HR Exchange Network, your first stop for the latest research, strategies, and news from the HR space. And be among the first to register for our quarterly online events and free webinars, so you never miss key insights from your peers. That's hrexchangenetwork.com. All right, Eric, thank you for joining us today. Really excited to have you on our podcast.
Thanks, Mason. I'm really excited to be here.
Cool. So for those of you listening to the podcast, Eric Torigian and I have a great relationship. We work together quite a bit for the HR Exchange Network. He's one of our advisory board members. He is a columnist. He also speaks at our online events. And he's been a panelist as well, so it's really exciting to have him, to have you join our podcast and doing something new. So super excited about that. So what I'd like to kind of start with is I know you a little bit, but I'm not sure that our audience really knows you. So just kind of give us a quick, synopsis of, how you got into HR and what that career path looked like.
Yeah, so I have probably the most non-standard HR career path known to man. So I actually started out my career as an analyst. So I was doing computer programming work way back in the dark ages and writing medical billing software. So I had written a database for the National Maritime Union, and the president of the Maritime Union was friends with the president of the UAW. Ford needed somebody to work as a data analyst. My name and resume got passed along. Next thing you know, I'm a labor relations analyst sitting in the finishing operations building of the Ford Rouge complex. So my boss noticed that I did a pretty good job with the UAW. People seemed to like me. I had a pretty good job communicating. So he came to me one day and he said, if you want, I'll put you through the rotation program, sponsor you as the HR rotation. You go get your degree in HR, and I think you got something here. I think you'll be pretty good at it. So a few years later, I'm graduating with my master's degree in labor relations, and I've sat in the chair as a labor rep, as a safety rep, as a benefits specialist. I had an opportunity to spin a 401k plan from a local bank and launch it at a Putnam Investments. I had a chance to develop Quadros, which were brand new in the marketplace, launch FMLA, and how are we going to approach it. All of this leading to this job as an HR manager for a joint venture. And it was a great role, and it was a great place to start my generalist career because I was working for a board of directors. So we had 4 directors from Ford, 4 directors from U.S. Steel. The plant manager and his direct team, we all served as senior leaders of this small business. And it was just a great way to learn how to be an influence and what influence really HR had on the organization. Then, unfortunately, I had a chance to really do a lot of things that HR people don't necessarily like to always do. So I had to close a plant. I had to consolidate 2 facilities. I had to take some shifts off. We had to announce some closures of some locations. Were roles in national labor relations, working on national contracts with the UAW, worked on 3 or 4 of those. Had a chance to join a subcommittee that I thought sounded innocent enough. It was called Miscellaneous Letters. Once I joined the subcommittee, I later learned that miscellaneous letters include plant closures, the moratorium on closures, headcount reductions, job security. So it wasn't quite as innocent as it sounded, but all of it was a great grassroots level labor relations experience, and I really treasure those days. From there, I went and joined Pepsi. And at Pepsi, I learned how to move at the speed of light as an HR leader. So in my region, we made $900 million, and we like to say we made it 99 cents at a time. So it was a really high intensity, drinking from the fire hose and just a lot of leadership. And it was all about leadership at every level and change management. And two of the strongest skills that I think I developed in the time. From there, I had an opportunity to work for Comcast in an employee engagement role. So really addressing a lot of issues that employees had and trying to keep some of the negative feelings from getting too big. So they had 13 union organizing campaigns the year before I joined, and we kept it down to none the whole time I was there. And it was really just all about leadership and engaging employees. I always remember from my days, the division vice president and I were talking, and he said, hey, I need you to get up to Seattle and talk to those employees, and I need you to find out what's wrong with the employees up there. And I was thinking to myself, well, there's the problem right there, because it's not necessarily what's wrong with those employees, but what are we doing as leadership to frustrate them? And that's always been my approach. And what you'll see in my approach is always, what are we doing as leaders? And what is our leadership impact on the business? From there, I have had a few different roles leading bigger and bigger and bigger groups, culminating now where I'm the global vice president of HR for Akebono Brake and have responsibility for leading a transformation here.
What I think is so interesting, and why I think this is going to be such a great conversation, is that you didn't come to HR kind of that traditional way, and it gives you a different kind of perception of HR. It gives you a different, maybe a different vantage point, a way to think about HR, both, what it was like when you started, and then to where it is currently, and kind of what you've seen along that journey. So having said that, let's kind of take a State of the Union approach to our conversation. If you were going to stand up in front of a room full of HR professionals and had to give a State of HR speech, what would you say is the state of HR right now? What would you say is its condition?
It's funny that you choose that State of the Union template, because I was just thinking yesterday on my drive home, the simplicity with which Bill Clinton was able to sum up the political climate when he said, it's always the economy. That's the state today, is it's always leadership. And we oversimplify it, and we make it sound too simple, or we make it hard, and people want to take it. They don't know what it means. But listen, it's leadership. This is about being leaders. It's about setting a vision, setting a direction, giving people the understanding of what they're being asked to do today. How does that fit into the bigger vision, and how are they driving the bottom line? If people can understand that, they'll do miracles for you. It's when they don't know the vision, they don't know the direction, they don't know what's happening, that's when the companies start to struggle.
So let's kind of look at this from an analysis standpoint. So, what do you believe are the critical pieces of good leadership? Now, I know that, there are certain factors you can't take into account, for industry, obviously, because every industry, maybe requires a different leader or a different type of leader. So keeping that in mind, generally speaking, what do you think are some of the hallmarks of good HR leadership?
Yeah, and I think we're in the season right now, too, as we're starting to wrap up our year-end evaluations and we're starting to do goal planning for the upcoming year. This is where HR provides their strongest support to the organization. So we need to be the conduit from the senior leaders to the employees through this goal setting exercise. And we need to ensure that people have goals that align and that people are working on the right things and that we have the right direction. And I always go back to a meeting I had with one of the CEOs who I was supporting when I was doing some consulting work. And I was out talking to the employees and evaluating as a good HR leader, what's the culture, what's the climate? So he called me up and he says, hey, I need you to stop asking people about the top 4 priorities. And I was taken aback, and I paused for a minute. I said, okay, tell me some more. What are you thinking? He said, well, you're confusing them. We don't share our top 4 priorities with everybody. Now they're getting confused. They don't understand what's going on. They think something's wrong. So you just need to stop talking about it. And, oh, by the way, don't publish org charts anymore. And I challenged him back, and I said, listen, not only do people need to know what the top 4 priorities are, they need to know how their priorities fit into those. Because if they're working on something that doesn't support one of those top 4, they arguably shouldn't be doing it. And that's where HR's strongest role in the organization is. Are we working on the right things to move those key priorities forward?
Well, and you mentioned a couple of things there. The first one being the role of transparency, from an HR perspective. And I think, HR tends to be very mindful of transparency, especially when you think about, the type of information that they deal in. You're dealing with, personnel information, you're dealing with, pay information and if there's a situation that requires, some type of punitive, action or something to that effect, you're dealing with a lot of, protected information. And I think the gut reaction for an HR professional is to be very careful when it comes to transparency. But having said that, you have to take a step back and look at the workforce now. I mean, in reality, transparency it's huge. I mean, they easily have access to all kinds of information. And if they get it from somewhere else, that's where you get the problem. Sorry, I think I cut you off.
You'll only have to look at Twitter today to be proven that. Right? People are thirsty for firsthand knowledge of what's happening. And I actually have written on my wall in a black Sharpie, which I'm sure that the landlord's not going to be real happy about, but written on my wall are the core values. And it's high trust, learning culture, transparent, nimble, authentic, casual but professional, multicultural, open, transparent, two-way dialogue. And I think that's more than just business today. That's the world today. That's the expectation. And people have this expectation that they're going to get open, transparent information. And I think the days of the gatekeepers and no disrespect intended, but to the publishers controlling access to information and gatekeepers to information. It used to be we all tuned in at 6 o'clock at night. We watched the 6 o'clock news, and we got a filtered version of the news. And then we would go onto the radio. Like, what would they say? You could read about it tomorrow, watch it at 11, or hear about it now. But all of these curated lists of news was the norm. Mm-hmm. Today, it's a completely different environment that we live in. And in the employment space, it's the same thing. People just want to know, what is the information? What's our strategy around that information? How does that fit into our vision? And what do you need me to do to make this successful? And I keep going back to that very simple formula. But I think we overcomplicate it at times.
Well, and I don't even think it's just that people, want transparency. I think it's expected. It's not just, hey, if you give it to us, great. If not, fine. We're not going to like it. But it's no, we expect it. And I think that kind of goes back to your point. It's, the workforce today is very, very focused on, being part of something larger than themselves. I think the research, that I've seen shows that, folks will go to work for a company that aligns with, their values, more often than they will go to work for someone who offers them more money, because they want to be involved with an organization that they can be proud to work for, but work for an organization that represents them and represents their kind of look at the world. So and transparency is a huge piece of that, because if you're being secretive, it just, the reaction from folks is very, very different than what it used to be.
No, they can spot a fake a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
But you said something else very interesting, is when they don't have the information, people fill in the gaps.
Very much so. Mm-hmm.
I just had a conversation with a group of employees, and I was trying to get them to stay focused and stay aligned as we go through a transformation. And I said, listen, and this was almost my direct quote, if you have a question, call me, tweet me, or ask me. Don't ask the guy next to you, because that guy knows no more than you do. But what happens is they get together. You don't give them information. People get together. They start to build their strategy. And a lot of their strategies and a lot of their beliefs of what's happening, they give us way too much credit. But they craft these incredibly complex scenarios where everything is going to fall apart, and that's just human nature. So you've got to be alert to these vacuums, and you got to fill it with transparent, accurate information.
Right.
And I think to your second point, if you start to lie to people, or if you're not authentic to people, you lose your opportunity. So be yourself. Unless you're a jerk, then be somebody else.
Very true. Well, and I think workers now, it's more than just, work is so much different than for instance, for me than it was for my parents. And I think that's a fair statement. My parents, it was, go to work, get your paycheck, don't do anything to rock the boat. But now you have, folks who are my age, folks who are younger than me, who are coming into the workforce. They're I don't necessarily want to put it this way, but from their perspective, rocking the boat is the norm. They want to make those shifts. They want to move things and push the envelope. I think where HR struggles, and this goes back to leadership, is that your leaders in HR right now are kind of my parents' age or a little younger. They're not so sure about the shifting winds, and they don't necessarily know, how to kind of account for that and how to figure that out. And I think that's where, you see some of the struggles between leaders today and the workforce. That if you want to call it a gap, I would be a little bit hesitant to use that word, but that's where your difference is sometimes is leaders don't always account for that. Or have the ability to account for it, especially when you've got workers that's kind of their bread and butter. That's what they do.
I was just coaching someone on a job search, and I was giving her some advice, and I was challenging her. So she's chasing this job, and I said, well, let's think about it a little bit. Where are you going to work? Well, and this physical, I said, no. Where are you going to work? What is the culture? What's the climate? Mm-hmm. Who are they? What do they do? How do they make their money? And I said, okay, now the bigger question is, who are their competitors? And who are the disruptors in the space? We've gotten to where disruptors becoming a thing of its own. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times, if you look at the disruptors, they're the ones who are going to push the envelope. Are they going to be successful? Maybe, maybe not. But they're going to show you where the edges are and where the boundaries are, and that's going to show you the framework.
And and disruptors, it's almost it's very interesting, because I'm going to liken it to kind of the shift that we've seen, just over the last few years. Beforehand, employers were very much in control of, kind of that hiring process. It's like they're the ones that can give you the job or not give you the job. But that has changed drastically. I think most people will tell you and will accept that it is an employees market. They're the ones who decide if they're going to work for you or not, and they're basing it on a completely different set of criteria than maybe what the HR professional or the recruiter or the company is using or has been using in the past. So it has changed, and it
has changed, and it's evolved, and the capability has evolved, and now I sound like a bit of an older man, but when I started, I remember everyone saying, hey, where are these kids coming from? Your generation, you guys where are you coming from with all these computers? The first manager of labor relations I worked for in 1989, not only was there no computer in his office, there was no voicemail. And he vowed that nobody in labor relations would have voicemail because they would avoid people's calls. And look, now play the tape forward 20, 30 years and look at where we sit today with technology and where it's headed. And I was at my daughter's school doing a volunteer day. She's 4 years old, and they're doing graphing. And they're graphing out how many kids wore blue today and how many girls are in class and how many stop signs did we pass. And the capability curve is truly the hockey stick. Mm-hmm. And we've got to put people in a situation where, and I liken it to a quote often accredited to Steve Jobs, which is start hiring smart people and let them show you what to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I go back to leadership. Leadership's about not telling people how to do something. It's about having a vision for what you want them to accomplish. Then get out of their way and let them get there.
Right. There's a healthy amount of trust that kind of goes into that equation. I think I remember attending an HR seminar. I believe it was earlier this year. It may have been late last year. But the one thing that I walked away from that event with, not just from a professional standpoint, but from a personal standpoint, and I certainly think it applies to this conversation, is you have to have a healthy relationship with risk. And I think that's something that HR really has to grapple with now, is having that healthy relationship with risk, because there are a lot of things changing. You've got more disruptors, both in the form of workers and in the form of technology and strategy and ideology and so on and so forth. You've got all of these things out there. You almost have to say, okay, this is going to be a risk, but we're going to try it. If it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pan out. But what did we learn from that in the process? And I think I'm curious to hear, what is your take on that? Do you think HR needs to have that healthy risk or healthy relationship with risk, or do you think it needs to be tempered? What is your opinion about that?
Oh, absolutely. And you're hitting on a hot button item for me recently, because we're doing a lot of decisions that people come and look for counsel on. There are no yes and no answers, and there is no right and wrong to them. So now all of a sudden we become managers of risk. And you basically have to lay out for people and help them think through, if you take scenario 1, here's what will happen and here are the risks. If you take scenario 2, here's what could happen and here are the risks. And then how do you now make a decision based on managing those things? Mm-hmm. And I think we're uniquely situated, and as a CEO who I was recently working with, you saw how we say to me, you are the most objective person on the team. Everybody else has a dog in the race, and it's your job to keep us level on risk. And I think that's where HR, again, what's our HR superpower, as you asked me one time, one of our superpowers is to be objective and to manage that situation and to give people an objective view of risk.
Where do you think the employee fits into that? Because we obviously, this podcast is focused on human resources, but we can't ignore that employees have a huge stake in this. I mean, obviously they want the company to succeed. They want to be a part of those goals, part of those plans. So what does the employee piece look like? Do you say to your employees or bring them into the hall and say, look, this is going to be risky. This is the reality. Are you willing to do this? Are you willing to take part in this? What's the employee piece of that feel like?
Yeah. Dare I go back to transparency and nimble and then learning culture. And it's not about sheltering them from it. It's about creating a safe place for them to do it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to be very prescriptive and give them the actual sheet music. Once they've played the sheet music enough times, they'll start to improvise and they'll come off music. Some people never will. But if you can keep them on it, they'll play beautiful tunes from the sheet music. Many others will take that and turn it into something you've never even imagined. But you have to give them those prescriptive steps.
Right.
I remember a time, and I like to tell a lot of stories. I remember a time at Frito-Lay when we were having a conference, and it was all the management, so supervisors and above. It was 450-some people. And we were thinking through the HR presentation. And I stood up on the stage and I said, hey, everybody who took part in a culture council event, stand up. Now stay standing. And everyone who worked on a safety committee or everyone who worked on a talent management or succession plan. And by the time I'm done, I'm going to say 80, 90% of the people are standing. I said, look, this is your HR team. Look around. And that's really the power of HR. Because all I am is I'm an advocate, and I'm just the spokesman. HR is the team. And this is what do you need and what's your expectations, and then I'll be your advocate and your spokesman for it. But at the end of the day, you have the responsibility now to execute it. And if I say go execute a culture diversity event in your region, when you leave, it sounds like a great idea. You get back to your office and you sit down and you say, I'm going to do this. You have no idea what to do. So what happens is your workday pours in over it, and then it gets lost and it goes away. But if I can give you the prescriptive steps and say, okay, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. Now do step 1, do step 2, do step 3. Now you have a mechanism to do it. And HR is all of us.
So
I'm sure there's a song in there somewhere.
There probably is. So I want to shift gears for a second, and I'm going to read a quote to you from an article that was published recently on HR Exchange Network, and I want to hear your reaction to it. So this quote comes from a piece called HR Makes Some Noise. It's by HR curator Dave Milner. So here's the quote. HR needs to start letting people working in their organization know what they are doing and how they are impacting the bottom line. So I'm curious, what's your reaction to that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I love Dave and the work that he's doing, and I think he's nailed it spot on. And now's the time where we need to be vocal. And like we've been talking about, the world has changed. And I think now HR especially, we need to break down this view as a bureaucratic administrative function. So many organizations still see us as the administrative record keeper. And yes, those are important functions. We need to pay people properly. We need the benefits to be done properly. Open enrollment needs to run smoothly. And all of those things are the baseline. You got to do those to get the right to do everything else. But now we need to start talking to people about what it is that we can offer beyond that. We need to leverage all of these new mediums. We need to do articles. We need to leverage the HR Exchange Network. We need to use podcasts. I'm launching my new podcast, Lessons from a CHRO. We're going to have these kind of conversations, and it's really all about you, and it's about what do you do as a leader in an organization. And HR is about how do I help you be successful. We need to get this conversation going on. We need to show people what we can truly do for an organization and how we can help. Actually, I think it's exciting times.
I would agree with you, and I would agree with a comment as well. I mean, I'm not an HR professional myself. What I typically tell people is that, and I know you've heard me say this before. I tell people, think of HR like the planet Saturn. HR is the planet itself, but I am on the outermost ring looking in. I see a lot of different things happening in the space. And from my perspective and from what I'm looking at what people are doing in the space. I'm looking at, their strategies, the new innovations, the way they're using technology, the way they're using social media, the way they're using, articles and podcasts and contributing to reports and all of these different ways, to at the end of the day, share their knowledge. It's not just about, hey, look what we're doing. It's about, hey, look at what we're doing and look at how it's being successful and look at how the employees are latching onto this. And at the end of the day, HR's success is really driven back to the employees and driven by the way, they impact the bottom line, the way they they interact with one another, the way they interact with the company, how they're engaged, what their experience is like. That is where HR's success is at. And I think anytime HR has those success stories, they need to get them out there, because HR has this stigma of being, I've got a problem with my payroll sheet, I need to go see HR, or I have a problem with, whatever. It's like, yeah, HR was that maybe a long time ago, but HR is so much more now, and it embodies so much more. And I think HR professionals really have an opportunity to be the architect of that and show what they're doing in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I liken back to when I started at Ford, we were the personnel department. Mm-hmm. And, now more than not, we're people services. So, even in just the words we use to describe ourselves, there's a transformation, but we need to accelerate it now, and we need to get out, and we need to be vocal, and we need to be public, and we need to help people that see that we're just here to give you the tools that you need to have the best possible career you can have, because a rising tide lifts all ships.
Right. The question for HR is what can I do to make you successful? What tools can I provide you that will help you be successful? Because when you're successful, we're successful. And I think that's a great place to end this conversation. So, Eric, this was phenomenal. I learned a lot from you. It was just a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed taking part as well.
Thanks, Mason. I really enjoyed it. And if anybody wants to reach out, I'd love to continue the conversation. So you can reach me at www.Torigian, Torigian.com. You can get me on LinkedIn or at Eric Torigian on Twitter.
That was Eric Torigian with the Akebono Brake Corporation. We appreciate his time, and we also appreciate your time. Stay tuned.